Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963. Chapter 1. And you wonder why we get called the Weird Watsons. It was one of those super duper cold Saturdays. One of those days when you breathed out, your breath kind of hung frozen in the air like a hunk of smoke, and you could walk along and look exactly like a train blowing out big fat white puffs of smoke. It was so cold that if you were stupid enough to go outside, your eyeballs would automatically blink 1,000 times all by themselves, probably so the juice inside them wouldn't freeze up. It was so cold that if you spit, the slob would be an ice cube before it hit the ground. It was about a zillion degrees below zero. It was even cold inside our house. We put sweaters and hats and scarves and 3 pairs of socks on and still were cold. The thermostat was turned all the way up and the furnace was banging and sounding like it was about to blow up, but it still felt like Jack Frost had moved in with us. All of my family sat real close together on the couch under a blanket. Dad said that would generate a little bit of heat, but he didn't have to tell us this because it seemed like the cold automatically made us want to get together and huddle up. My little sister, Joetta, sat in the middle, and all you could see were her eyes because she had a scarf wrapped around her head. Was next to her, and on the other side was my mother. Mama was the only one who wasn't born in Flint, so the cold was coldest to her. All you could see were her eyes, too, and they were shooting bad looks at Dad. She always blamed him for bringing her all the way from Alabama to Michigan, a state she called a giant icebox. Dad was bundled up on the other side of Joey, trying to look at anything but Mama. And next to Dad, sitting with a little space between them, was my older brother Byron. Byron had just turned 13, so he was officially a teenage juvenile delinquent and didn't think it was cool to touch anybody or let anybody touch him, even if it meant he froze to death. Byron had tucked the blanket between him and Dad down to the cushion of the couch to make sure he couldn't be touched. Dad turned on the TV to try to make us forget how cold we were, but all that did was get him in trouble. There was a special news report on Channel 12 telling us about how bad the weather was, and Dad groaned when the guy said, "And if you think it's cold now, wait until tonight. The temperature is expected to drop into record low territory, possibly reaching the negative 20s. In fact, we won't be seeing anything above zero for the next 4 to 5 days." He was smiling when he said it, but none of us Watsons thought it was funny. We all looked over at Dad. He just shook his head and pulled the blanket over his eyes. And then the guy said, "Here's a little something we can use to brighten our spirits and give us something to look forward to the future. The temperature in Atlanta, Georgia is forecast to reach—" Dad coughed real loud and jumped off the couch to turn the TV off. But we all heard that weatherman say the mid-70s. That guy might as well have tied Dad to a tree and said, "Ready, aim, fire." "Atlanta," Mama said. "That's 150 miles from home." "Willona," Dad said. "I knew it," Mama said. "I knew I should have listened to Moses Henderson." "Who?" I asked. Dad said, "Oh, Lord, not that sorry story. You got to let me tell him about what happened with him." Mama said, "Well, there's not a whole lot to tell, just a story about a young girl who made a bad choice. If you do tell it, you make sure you get all the facts right." We all huddled as close as we could get because we knew Dad was going to try to make us forget about the cold by cutting up. Me and Joey started smiling right away, and Byron tried to look cool and bored. "Kids," Dad said, "I almost wasn't your father. You guys came real close to having a clown for a daddy named Hambone Henderson." "Daniel Watson, you stop right there. You're the one that started that Hambone nonsense. Before you started that, everyone called him by his Christian name, Moses, and he was a respectable boy, too. He wasn't a clown at all. But the name stuck, didn't it? Hambone Henderson. Me and your granddaddy called him that because that boy had a head shaped just like a ham bone, had more knots and bumps on his head than a dinosaur. So as you guys sit here giving me these dirty looks because it's a little chilly outside, ask yourselves if you would rather be a little cool or go through life being known as the Hambonettes." Me and Joey cracked up. Byron kind of chuckled, and Mama put her hand over her mouth. She did this whenever she was going to give a smile because she had a great big gap between her front teeth. If Mama thought something was funny, first you'd see her trying to keep her lips together to hide the gap, and then if the smile got to be too strong, you'd see that gap for a hot second before Mama's hand would come up to cover it, and then she'd crack up too. Now laughing only encouraged Dad to cut up more, so when he saw the whole Saw the whole family thinking he was funny. He really started putting on a show. He stood in front of the TV. Yup, Hambone Henderson proposed to your mother about the same time I did. Fought dirty, too. Told your mama a pack of lies about me. And when she didn't believe them, he told her a pack of lies about Flint. And then Dad started talking Southern style, imitating this Hambone guy. Willona, I heard tell about that weather up that far north in Flint, Michigan. Heard it's colder than inside an icebox. Seen a movie about it. Think it was made in Flint. Movie called Nanook of the North. Yep. Do believe for sure it was made in Flint. Flint, Michigan. Folks round there live in these things called igloos. According to what I seen in this here movie, most of the folks in Flint is Chinese. Don't believe I seen Nan one color folk in that whole dang city. You a Bama gal. Don't believe you'd be too happy living in an igloo. Ain't got nothing against him, but I don't believe you'd be too happy living amongst a whole slew of Chinese folks. Don't believe you'd like the food. Only thing them Chinese folks in the movie ate was whales and seals. Don't believe you like no whale meat. Don't taste a lick like chicken and don't taste like pork at all. Now Mama pulled her hand away from her mouth. Daniel Watson, you are one lying man. Only thing you said that was true was that being in Flint is like living in an igloo. I knew I should have listened to Moses. Maybe these babies might have been born with lumpy heads, but at least they'd be warm lumpy heads. You know Birmingham is a good place, and I don't mean just the weather either. The life is slower. The people are friendlier. Oh, yeah, Dad interrupted. They're a laugh a minute down there. Let's see. Where was that colored-only bathroom downtown? Daniel, you know what I mean. Things aren't perfect, but people are more honest about the way they feel. She took her eyes off Dad and put them on Byron. And folks there do know how to respect their parents. Byron rolled his eyes like he didn't care. All he did was tuck the blanket farther into the couch's cushion. Dad didn't like the direction the conversation was going, so he called the landlord for the 100th time. The phone was still busy. That snake in the grass has got the phone off the hook. Well, it's going to be too cold to stay here tonight. Let me call Sydney. She just had a new furnace put in. Maybe we can spend the night there. Now, Aunt Sydney was kind of mean, but her house was always warm, so we kept our fingers crossed that she was home. Everyone, even Byron, cheered when Dad got Aunt Sydney on the phone, and she told us to hurry over before we froze to death. Dad went out to try to get the brown bomber started. That's what we called our car. It was a 1948 Plymouth that was dull brown and real big. Byron said it was turd brown. Uncle Bud gave it to Dad when he was 13 years old, and we had had it for 2 years. Me and Dad took real good care of it, but some of the time it didn't like to start up in the winter. After 5 minutes, Dad came back in, huffing and puffing and slapping his arms across his chest. Well, it was touch and go there for a while, but the great brown one pulled through again. Everyone cheered, but soon me and Byron quit cheering and started frowning right away. By the way Dad smiled at us, we knew what was coming next. Dad pulled 2 ice scrapers out of his pocket and said, "Okay, boys, let's get out there and knock those windows out." We moaned and groaned and put some more coats on and went outside to scrape the car's windows. I could tell by the way he was pouting that Byron was going to try to get out of doing his share of the work. "I'm not going to do your part, Byron. You'd better do it, and I'm not playing either." "Shut up, punk." I went over to the brown bomber's passenger side and started hacking away at the slab of ice that was all over the windows. I finished Mama's window and I took a break. Scraping ice off windows when it's that cold can kill you. I didn't hear a sound coming from the other side of the car, so I yelled out, "I'm serious, Byron. I'm not doing that side too, and I'm only going to do half the windshield. I don't care what you do to me." The windshield of the bomber wasn't like the new 1963 cars. It had a big bar running down the middle of it, dividing it in half. "Shut your stupid mouth. I got something more important to do now." I peeked around the back of the car to see what By was up to. The only thing he had scraped off was the outside mirror, and he was bending down to look at himself in it. He saw me and said, "You know what, Square? I must be adopted. There just ain't no way 2 folks as ugly as your mama and daddy could give birth to someone as sharp as me." And then he was running his hands over his head like he was brushing his hair. I said, "Forget you," and I went back over to the other side of the car to finish the back window. I had half of the ice off when I had to stop and catch my breath again. I heard Byron mumble my name. I said, "You think I'm stupid? It's not going to work this time." He mumbled my name again, and it sounded like his mouth was full of something. So as me and Bi scraped the ice off the brown bomber, I wasn't going to be fooled again. I kept on chopping ice off the back window and ignored Bi's mumbling voice. The next time I took a rest, Byron was still calling my name, and it sounded like he had something in his mouth. He was saying, "Kay, Kay, help, help." When he started banging on the door of the car, I went to take a peek about what was going on. Bi was leaned over the outside mirror looking at something real close. Big puffs of steam were coming out of the side of the mirror. I picked up a big, hard chunk of ice to get ready for Byron's trick. "Kay, Hallie, go get on, go get on." "I'm not playing, Byron. I'm not that stupid. You better start doing your side of the car. I'll tear you up with this ice ball." He banged his hand against the car harder and started stomping his feet. "Please, Kay, Hallie, go get on." I raised the chunk of ice over my head. "I'm not playing, Bi. You better get busier. I'm telling Dad." I moved closer, and when I got right up next to him, I could see boogers running out of his nose and tears running down his cheeks. These weren't tears from the cold either. These were big, juicy crybaby tears. I dropped my chunk of ice. "Bi, what's wrong?" "Hallie, Kenny, Hallie, go get help." I moved closer. I couldn't believe my eyes. Byron's mouth was frozen on the mirror. He was as stuck as a fly on flypaper. Now, I could have done a lot of stuff to him, and if it would have been me with my lips stuck on something, he would have tortured me for a couple of days before he got help. But not me, though. I nearly broke my neck trying to get into the house to rescue Byron. As soon as I ran through the front door, Mama, Dad, and Joey all yelled, "Close that door!" "Mama, quick, it's Bi. He's froze up outside." Nobody seemed too impressed and didn't move. I screamed, "Really? He's froze to the car. Help, he's crying." Now, of course, that shook him up. You could cut Byron's head off and he probably wouldn't cry. "Kenneth Bernard Watson, what on earth are you talking about?" "Mama, please hurry up." Mama, Dad, and Joey threw on some extra coats and followed me to the brown bomber. The fly was still stuck and buzzing. "Oh, Mama, Helen, get me out here." "Oh, my Lord," Mama screamed, and I thought she was going to do one of those movie-style faints where she put her hand over her forehead and staggered back a little bit. Joey, of course, started crying right along with Byron, and Dad was doing his best not to explode laughing. Big puffs of smoke were coming out of his nose and mouth as he tried to squeeze his laughs down. Finally, he put his head on his arms and leaned against the car's hood and howled. "Byron," Mama said, "it's okay, sweetheart." She wiped tears off his cheeks with the end of her scarf. "How did this happen?" She sounded like she was going to cry any minute herself, and Dad raised his head and said, "Why are you asking him how this happened? Can't you tell, Willona? This little knucklehead was kissing his reflection in the mirror and got his lips stuck." Dad took a deep breath. "Is your tongue stuck too?" "No, couldn't he, how?" Well, at least the boy hadn't gotten too passionate with himself. Dad thought that was hilarious and put his head back on his arms. Mama didn't see anything funny. "Daniel Watson, what are we going to do?" "What do y'all do when this here happens up here?" Now, Mama started talking Southern style when she got worried. Instead of saying here, she said here, and instead of saying you all, she said y'all. Dad stopped laughing long enough to say, "Willona, I've lived in Flint all my life, 35 years, and I swear this is the first time I've ever seen anyone with their lips frozen to a mirror. Honey, I don't know what to do. Wait until he thaws out?" "Pull him off, Dad," I suggested. Byron went nuts. He started banging his hands on the brown bomber's doors again and mumbling, no, let him." Joey blubbered out, "This is just like the horrible story Kenny read to me about the guy Narcissi who stared at himself so long he forgot to eat and starved to death. Mommy, please save him." And she went over and hugged her arms around Byron's stupid waist. Mama asked Dad, "What about hot water? Could we pour just enough hot water on the mirror so it would warm up and we could get him off?" She kept wiping tears off Bi's cheek and saying, "Don't worry, baby. We're going to get you off this." But her voice was so shaky and southern that I wondered if we'd be driving around this summer with the skeleton dangling from the outside mirror by its lips. Dad said, "I don't know. Pouring water on him might be the worst thing to do. But it might be our only chance. Why don't you go get some hot tap water and I'll stay to wipe his cheeks?" Joey told Bi, "Don't worry. We'll come right back." And she stood on her tiptoes and gave him a kiss, and then she and Mama ran inside, and Dad cracked up all over again. "Well, lover boy, I guess this means no one can call you Hot Lips, can they?" Dad was killing himself. "Or the last of the red hot lovers, huh?" He tugged on Byron's ear a little, pulling his face back. Bi went nuts again. Don't do that, hurry." I guess that's not going to work, is it? Every time he wiped the tears away and the little mustache of boogers on Byron's lip, Dad couldn't help laughing until a little river of tears were coming out of Dad's eyes, too. Dad tried to straighten his face out when Mama and Joey came running back with the steaming glass of hot water, but the tears were still running down his cheeks. Mama tried to pour the water on the mirror, but her hands were shaking so much she was splashing it all over the place. Dad tried too, but he couldn't look at Byron without laughing and shaking. That meant I had to do it. Now, I knew if my lips were frozen on something and everybody was shaking too much to pour water on them, except for Byron, he would do some real cruel stuff to me. He probably would have accidentally splashed my eyes until they were frozen open or put water in my ears until I couldn't hear anything. But not me. I gently poured a little stream of water over the mirror. And Dad was right. That was the worst thing we could do. The water made a cracking sound and froze solid as soon as it touched the mirror by By's lips. Maybe By's mouth was frozen, but his hands sure weren't, and he popped me right hard in the forehead. I hate to say it, but I started crying too. And it's no wonder the neighbors call us the Weird Watsons behind our back. There we were, all 5 of us, standing around a car with the temperature about 1,000,000 degrees below zero, and each and every one of us were crying. Todd, By yelled, Daniel Watson, what are we going to do? You got to get this boy to the hospital. My baby going to die. Dad tried to look real serious. Willona, how far do you think we'll get with me driving down the street with this little clown attached to the mirror? What am I supposed to do? Have him run beside the car all the way down to the emergency room? Mama looked real close at By's mouth, closed her eyes for a second, like she was praying, and finally said, Daniel, you get in there and call the hospital and see what they say we should do. Joey and Kenny, you go with your daddy. Now, Dad and Joey went crying into the house, and I stayed by the brown bomber because I figured that Mama was clearing everybody out for something. And By did too, and he looked at Mama in a real nervous way. Mama put her scarf around Byron's face. Sweetheart, you know we got to do something. I'm just going to try to warm your face up just a little, so relax. Okay, you know I love you, and I wouldn't do anything to hurt you, right? Now, if Mama was trying to make Byron relax, she wasn't doing a real good job at it. All this talk about love and not getting hurt was making him real nervous. What are you going to do, huh? Don't hurt me. Don't hurt me. What are you going to do? Mama moved the scarf away and put one hand on Byron's chin and the other on his forehead. No, Helly, Kenny, Helly. Mama gave Byron's head a good hard snatch, and my eyes automatically shut, and my hands automatically flew up to cover my ears, and my mouth automatically flew open and screamed, Yow! I didn't see it, but I bet Byron's lips stretched a mile before they finally let go of that mirror. I bet his lips looked like a giant rubber band before they snapped away from that glass. And I didn't hear it, but I bet Byron's lips made a sound of a giant piece of paper being ripped in half. When I opened my eyes, Byron was running to the house with his hands over his mouth, and Mama was following right behind him. I ran over to the mirror to see how much of Byron's mouth was still stuck there. The dirty dogs let Byron get away with not doing his share of the windows, and I had to do the whole car myself. When we finally got going to Aunt Sydney's house, I decided to pay Byron back for punching me in the forehead and getting out of doing his part of the window scraping. Joey was sitting between us, so I felt somewhat safe. I said to her in a loud voice, Joetta, guess what? I'm thinking of writing a book on my own, a comic book. About what? Well, it's going to be about this real mean criminal who has a terrible accident and turns him into a superhero. Joey knew I was going to tease Byron, so she sat there looking like I should be careful about what I said. And finally I asked her, do you know what I'm going to call this superhero? What? I'm going to call him the Lipless Wonder. All he does is beat up superheroes smaller than him, and he's only afraid of a cold mirror. Now all the Weird Watsons, except Byron, cracked up. Mama's hand covered her mouth. I was the only one who saw Byron flip me the dirty finger sign and try to whisper without smearing all the Vaseline Mama had put on his lips. You wait. I'm going to kick your little behind. And then he made his eyes go cross, which was his favorite way of teasing me. But I didn't care, because I knew I had won this time.